She stood in the rain, abandoned on the side of the road by the man who vowed to love her. But it wasn't her billionaire husband who came back for her. It was the man paid to protect him. In a world built on control, appearances, and silent suffering, Isabella had learned to smile through her prison. But when one night of cruelty crosses an invisible line, the quiet bodyguard who's seen too much finally steps out of the shadows. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The soft clink of crystal echoed through the dining room like a metronome of civility. Every surface gleamed. Polished mahogany, imported marble, silver cutlery aligned like weapons of decorum. Candles flickered in their candelabras, casting long, restless shadows across the table. At the head sat Richard Harrington, billionaire tech mogul and man of impossible standards. Isabella sat to his right, always to his right. That was the rule. Everything had rules. Her dress had to match the aesthetic of the evening. Her voice had to be soft, polite, and no louder than the strings playing in the background. Her opinions, when asked, were expected to align perfectly with his. She was, after all, not his partner. She was his possession. Beautiful, polished, predictable. She folded her hands neatly in her lap beneath the table, letting her long fingers clasp each other gently, as if holding herself together was the only way not to fall apart. Her wedding ring was too tight. It had always been, but Richard liked it that way, so you never forget you're mine. Dinner was a quiet affair unless Richard had something to boast about, which he often did. He spoke about mergers and acquisitions like he was discussing a fine wine, his voice smooth and syrupy, laced with superiority. Isabella barely listened. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the clock ticking above the fireplace, on the dying peonies in the vase, on the silent man standing in the corner. Adrian. The bodyguard wore black, as always. Tailored suit. Earpiece. Posture like a fortress. His eyes, though, they were not cold. They were dark and observant, flickering briefly toward her every time Richard raised his voice or snapped his fingers for wine. She noticed those moments more than she should have. But it was hard not to. Adrian never smiled openly. He didn't dare. But there were these micro-expressions, these subtle signs of discomfort or quiet defiance whenever Richard treated her like she wasn't there. He never said a word. But his silence was different from Richard's. His silence was loud. After dinner, Richard excused himself for a meeting. Another late-night Zoom call with board members in Tokyo or London, or wherever his money needed to sleep tonight. "Don't wait up," he said, barely glancing at her as he walked off, phone already in hand. As he disappeared into his office, Isabella remained seated. She exhaled, a slow, practiced breath, as though releasing the weight from her shoulders too quickly might draw attention. The staff began clearing the table, heads bowed, eyes averted. They had learned not to look too long. She stood up quietly, moving toward the terrace doors. She needed air. Just a few minutes of space where she didn't feel like furniture. As she passed Adrian near the hallway, their eyes met. Just a flicker of connection. He tilted his head slightly. Not a nod, just an acknowledgement. A gesture that said, "I see you," without using words. Isabella stepped out onto the balcony. The night was cool. A breeze rustled the ivy climbing the mansion walls. She leaned on the railing, staring out at the pool below. The moonlight painted the water silver. Behind her, the door slid open. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Adrian said, his voice low and measured. Not an order. Not a warning. Just concern wrapped in professionalism. She glanced at him, lips curving just slightly. "Afraid I'll drown in the pool?" A pause. His brow twitched, and he allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "No, but the air's getting colder." She looked back out into the dark. "So am I." He said nothing. He just stood there beside her, a respectful distance away, hands clasped behind his back. In that moment, silence became company. Not surveillance. Not formality. Just presence. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet solidarity was the first warmth she'd felt in years. The days in the Harrington estate blurred together like brushstrokes on a painting she hadn't asked to be a part of. Mornings began with silence. No kisses, no greetings. Just the soft clatter of breakfast dishes placed before her like offerings to a queen no one revered anymore. Richard was always up early, taking calls over black coffee, walking through the marble halls with his Bluetooth headset in one ear and a permanent scowl etched across his face. He was too busy to be cruel in the mornings. That was reserved for the evenings. Isabella learned to disappear between his moods. Adrian was always there, unmoving, dependable, quiet. Posted outside Richard's office, shadowing him at events, stationed discreetly in the corridors during high-profile meetings. But he also seemed to float where she was, always on the periphery. Always aware. She noticed it one afternoon when Richard was on a particularly volatile Zoom call. The study door was locked from the inside, a thick slab of oak sealing him in his fortress of ego and money. Isabella walked slowly down the corridor, book in hand, her bare feet making no sound on the Persian rug. Adrian stood just outside the office door, one hand resting lightly near his earpiece. His eyes shifted when he saw her. No startle, no movement, but something softened in them. He straightened slightly, stepping just an inch back from the wall as she approached. Isabella didn't mean to stop, but she did. "Long call today?" she asked lightly, glancing at the door. Adrian gave the faintest nod. "Investors in Singapore. One of the tech arms is underperforming." She tilted her head, surprised. "You listen?" "I'm paid to notice things," he replied. She smiled. Not a full smile, not yet, but it was the first real expression her face had worn all day. "Must be exhausting." There was a pause, and then he said, "Less exhausting than pretending not to notice." Her eyes flicked up to his, startled, but there was no judgment in his voice. Just quiet honesty. He was watching her, yes, but not in the way everyone else did. Not like the stylists who scrutinized her figure for the perfect dress. Not like the reporters who searched her eyes for scandal. He saw her like someone might see a painting covered in dust. Still there, still beautiful, just waiting to be uncovered. Another day, she was in the solarium, staring into a book she wasn't reading. Rain tapped against the glass above her. The storm had rolled in with little warning, and the house was unusually quiet. Richard was at the downtown office. The housekeeper was off. Even the cook had taken an early leave. She didn't hear him approach until his voice broke the quiet. "Do you like the rain?" Adrian asked, his voice softer than usual. Isabella looked up, startled but not frightened. He stood at the edge of the solarium, hands at his sides. Casual but respectful. "I used to," she said after a pause, closing the book. "Before it became just another thing I wasn't allowed to stand in." He stepped inside, looking out through the glass ceiling. Raindrops streamed down like tears. "You know," he said, "when I was a kid, I used to lie on the roof of our barn during storms. Thought if I stayed quiet enough, I could hear the clouds argue." She laughed. Genuinely. Light and sudden and full of surprise. "That's the strangest thing I've ever heard," she said, the laugh still caught in her throat. He gave a slight grin. "Strange things are usually true." Isabella stood slowly, the book forgotten on the seat. She felt her heart shift in her chest. Not in the wild, dizzy way she had felt when she first met Richard years ago, swept off her feet by charm and the illusion of love. This was different. Quieter. Steadier. Like a warm hand on your back when you didn't know you needed one. "You're not like the others," she said softly. "I know," Adrian replied, the smile fading into something more serious. "That's probably why I won't last long here." He turned to go, but before he stepped out, he paused. "Storm's clearing," he said. "Might be safe to step outside today." And then he was gone, his footsteps absorbed into the silence of the mansion. That night, Isabella dreamed of barns, of rain, and of clouds arguing softly above her. When she woke up, she realized she hadn't dreamed of Richard once. The rain started as a whisper against the car roof, barely audible over the hum of the engine and the angry rhythm of Richard's voice. "I told you not to embarrass me in front of them," he snapped, slamming his palm against the steering wheel for emphasis. The black Bentley lurched slightly, the tires gripping the slick pavement as he took the curve too fast. Isabella stared out the window, her arms crossed over her chest like a shield. Raindrops crawled down the glass like they were trying to escape the tension inside the car. "All I said," she replied, her voice calm but firm, "was that maybe Ethan's project had potential. That's not an attack on your judgment. You undermine me, Isabella." His voice dropped, now low and dangerous. "In front of people who matter. They matter because you make them gods," she said, still not looking at him. "But I refuse to pretend like I don't have a thought of my own." That was it. The final thread. Richard's foot hit the brake. Hard. The car screeched to a halt at the side of a quiet, tree-lined road on the outskirts of their estate, where no cameras would see and no staff would whisper. "You want to talk about thoughts?" he sneered. "Here's one, get out." Isabella turned to him slowly, rain now pounding against the windshield. "You're not serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "You want to challenge me like a woman with a backbone? Then you can walk home like one." The locks clicked. The passenger door popped open with a soft hiss. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Remorse, hesitation, even just decency. But all she saw was that old, entitled anger. That gleam of control. She stepped out. Rain swallowed her whole. Cold needles against her bare arms, soaking through her silk dress in seconds. Her heels sank slightly into the muddy roadside, the sharp chill biting into her bones. The door slammed shut behind her, and the car drove off. No hesitation, no second glance. The red taillights disappeared into the fog. She stood still for a few seconds, her body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the weight of it all. Her damp hair clung to her cheeks. Her makeup, once flawless, now streaked down her face like war paint. Behind her, trees loomed like silent witnesses. She wrapped her arms around herself and began to walk. Inside the mansion, Adrian stood by the window overlooking the driveway. His earpiece crackled once, then went silent. The gate camera showed the Bentley re-entering the property, driver alone. Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't wait. He moved. By the time Richard entered the front door, muttering into his phone about ungrateful women, Adrian was already gone. No one saw him slip away through the side entrance. No one stopped him as he tossed his earpiece onto the passenger seat of his own car and peeled out of the garage. He drove fast, scanning the side roads. Rain slashed across his windshield. His headlights cut through the fog like blades. Then he saw her. Isabella was trudging down the shoulder of the road, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, dress clinging to her skin, shoes caked in mud. She didn't even look up when he pulled up beside her. Adrian threw the car into park, jumped out, and shrugged off his jacket. "Isabella," he called over the rain. She turned slowly, eyes wide, soaked, startled. Then something in her broke. Her face crumpled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't try to hold herself together. He draped the jacket around her shoulders, guiding her gently into the passenger seat. She didn't speak. Her hands trembled. Her mascara had run in rivers down her cheeks. Adrian turned the heat on full blast and handed her a towel from the glove compartment. "Don't worry about anything," he said, voice low, steady. "You're safe." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment her lower lip trembled. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My place," he replied without hesitation. "Won't you lose your job?" He met her eyes, expression unwavering. "Some jobs are worth losing." The drive was silent. Rain lashed at the windshield, the wipers sweeping in rhythmic urgency, but inside Adrian's car, it was as if the world had pressed pause. Isabella sat wrapped in his jacket, trembling slightly, not from the cold anymore, but from the weight of everything she hadn't said for years. Her hair clung to her face, wet and tangled. Her makeup was gone, but there was something raw and powerful about her bare skin. She didn't cry. Not yet. She was still frozen in the moment, still processing the truth. He had left her in the storm. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. Literally. I don't know where else to take you, Adrian said at last, voice low, eyes still fixed on the road. But you don't have to go back there. She turned to him slowly. Are you sure? I wouldn't have come for you if I wasn't. She looked down at her hands in her lap. You'll lose your job. Then I'll lose it, he said without hesitation. You matter more than a paycheck. She didn't respond, but her jaw clenched, like she was holding back a flood of words that might never stop if she let one slip. Adrian's apartment was in a quiet, gated building on the edge of the city, hidden away from flashing cameras and the invasive eyes of the elite. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside, brick, sturdy, tucked behind a row of towering oaks. But the moment she stepped inside, Isabella felt her breath catch. It wasn't what she expected. The walls were a soft matte charcoal, lit by warm pendant lighting. Minimalist art adorned one side, and a grand bookshelf, floor to ceiling, lined the other. A record player sat near the fireplace, jazz humming softly from the speakers, as if the music had never been turned off. The air smelled of sandalwood and something like cedar. She turned to him slowly, water still dripping from her dress. You live here? He nodded, placing his keys on the console. I bought it a few years ago, after I left my family's estate. Estate, she echoed. Adrian paused, then looked at her. Yeah, I come from money. Not as loud as Richard's, but old, quiet wealth. My family owns a few vineyards and private security firms. I walked away from that life. Why? Because I got tired of watching people with power treat everyone else like dust under their feet. Their eyes locked. I see, she whispered. He took a step closer. There's a bathroom down the hall. Clean towels in the cabinet. Take your time. I'll put some tea on. She nodded silently and walked down the hallway, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood until she reached the guest bathroom. When she closed the door and finally saw herself in the mirror, the dam cracked. Tears didn't fall in sobs or gasps. They came silently, freely, as if her body had finally been given permission to release years of captivity. She stood under the hot water until her fingers wrinkled, until the tears stopped blending with the water. When she stepped out, she wore one of Adrian's shirts, oversized, soft, comforting. On the counter was a folded pair of lounge pants and a note. No rush. You're safe here. She emerged 20 minutes later, her hair damp but brushed, her face clean, and the storm finally passed. Adrian was on the couch, a cup of tea on the coffee table, and a soft instrumental record playing. He stood as she entered the room. I wasn't sure if you liked peppermint or chamomile, he said, nodding toward the mugs. I like both, she replied. He gestured toward the couch. She sat carefully, legs tucked under her, the oversized shirt falling past her knees. You're not going back, he said quietly, more statement than question. No, she replied. Not this time. He nodded. Good. She picked up the tea, hands wrapped around the warm ceramic. Why did you come for me, Adrian? He turned to her slowly. Because I couldn't watch anymore. I thought you were just observing. Like the rest of them. I was never just observing you, Isabella, he said. I saw you. I always did. Her throat tightened. Even when I was pretending to be someone else. Especially then. They stayed on the couch for hours. Not touching. Not rushing anything. Just talking. About music. About favorite books. About childhood memories, forgotten cities, strange dreams. He told her about the time he almost became a pilot. She told him how she used to dream of opening a bookstore instead of marrying into power. By the time the sky outside lightened into dawn, Isabella had curled against the armrest, head resting on a cushion. Adrian stood to dim the lights. She looked up sleepily. You don't have to stay up. I'll be nearby, he said. If you need anything. Adrian. He turned back. Thank you. For coming back for me. He gave her a small smile. Always. Then he disappeared down the hall, the soft sound of a door clicking shut behind him. And for the first time in years, Isabella slept in a place where her body wasn't braced for pain. She slept without fear. She slept in sanctuary. The lawyer's office was nothing like the towering glass buildings Isabella was used to. the kind Richard operated from, where the ceilings felt high enough to make people small on purpose. This place was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a florist, its front desk manned by a middle-aged woman with soft eyes and a visible scar above her brow. Inside the office, the shelves were filled with actual law books, not just for decoration. A small desk fountain burbled quietly in the corner. The lawyer, Mrs. Delaney, was sharp-eyed and silver-haired, with hands that had weathered too many battles to tremble now. Adrian sat beside Isabella, his broad shoulders relaxed but alert. He said little during the meeting, letting Isabella speak for herself, but his presence was a fortress around her. Richard hadn't responded well when the divorce papers arrived. He called her a dozen times, at first shocked, then smug, then furious. He sent emails, legal threats, voice messages that started with "you'll regret this" and ended with "you're nothing without me." Isabella didn't answer a single one. Mrs. Delaney had warned her. Men like your husband don't fight for love, they fight for power. Prepare for war, but don't let it scare you. I've seen worse. You have something he'll never understand, calm. Adrian drove her home after the first court filing, his hand loose on the wheel, his eyes flicking to her now and then. You're quiet, he said softly. She nodded. I keep expecting to feel afraid. But I don't. It's strange. It's not strange, Adrian said, glancing at her. It's called peace. You've just never had it before. Richard did what powerful men always do when control slips through their fingers. He retaliated. He froze the joint accounts, assuming she'd panic. She didn't. Adrian had already transferred her half of their savings into a protected trust under her name before Richard could touch it. He sent letters to her parents, accusing her of infidelity and mental instability. They had been distant for years, more interested in Richard's money than their daughter's happiness. But when they reached out, she didn't respond. She didn't need to justify herself to people who had sold her peace for prestige. When Richard tried to publicly humiliate her, leaking edited videos of her at parties, telling tabloids she had emotional problems, Adrian brought in a private investigator. Within 48 hours, they had uncovered evidence of Richard's offshore accounts, illegal stock trades, and suspicious shell companies. Evidence enough to silence him legally and permanently. But Isabella didn't want revenge. She just wanted out. And so she signed the final papers in a quiet courthouse with no press and no ceremony. It was raining again that day, but she didn't hide from it. She let it fall on her face as she stood outside the courthouse, chin tilted toward the sky. Adrian stood under the awning, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Do you want an umbrella?" he called out. "No," she said, laughing. "I want to feel this one." The following weeks were slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. Adrian helped her find a new apartment. Not a penthouse, not a mansion, but a quiet place near the river with wide windows and sunlight that poured through in the mornings. It smelled like clean wood and the beginning of something. He never hovered. He came when invited. He stayed only when she asked. Sometimes they talked late into the night. Other times, he left her alone for days at a time, texting only to say, "Let me know if you need anything." He was building something with her, not claiming her. Not rushing to be the hero. Just there. Isabella enrolled in a design course downtown. Fashion had always been her secret rebellion, her way of expressing something louder than words. The first day she walked into class, she was trembling. She hadn't been Isabella, without Richard, in nearly a decade. When she came home, Adrian was waiting with takeout and a bottle of sparkling water chilled in his fridge. "I was either going to celebrate your first day," he said, "or break you out if you hated it." She laughed. "You've got a rescue complex." "No," he said, smiling. "I've got a you complex." Isabella's creativity came alive with startling speed. She filled notebooks with sketches, simple, elegant designs that felt like her. Honest fabric. Clean lines. A little rebellion stitched into every hem. Adrian helped her build a website. He connected her with a friend who handled small business branding. He sat on the floor for hours sorting swatches and colors with her, offering input only when asked. One night, as they sat shoulder to shoulder on her apartment floor, surrounded by fabric samples and pizza boxes, she leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "You saved me." Adrian shook his head. "No. I opened a door. You walk through it." The boutique had no name yet. Just an empty sign hanging above the glass storefront and sunlight spilling through the uncovered windows. The space was raw, exposed brick along the back wall, dusty concrete floors, and a lingering scent of fresh paint mixed with sawdust. Isabella stood in the center of it all, her fingertips brushing against the edges of a rolling rack still wrapped in plastic. Her designs, her real breathing designs, were stacked in garment bags in the back room, waiting to be revealed. "This is it," she said aloud, to no one in particular. Then she turned. Adrian leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching her with a small smile. "You look like you just stepped into a cathedral," he said. "I did," she murmured. "This is holy ground." The next few weeks blurred into a kind of beautiful exhaustion. She spent days refining her sketches, arguing over thread choices with tailors, adjusting necklines by millimeters. At night, she collapsed into bed with aching fingers and sore feet, and every morning she rose earlier than before. Her boutique wasn't just about fashion. It was about transformation. Every piece had a name: freedom, second wind, unlearned silence. Her garments whispered instead of shouted. They were made for women who had once been trapped, like her, and now needed something to armor their rebirth. Adrian remained her anchor. He installed the security system himself, painted the trim in the soft ivory shade she couldn't decide on. He brought coffee without being asked, took calls when she was too overwhelmed, fixed the lights when one sparked out. Never hovering, never invading, just quietly making sure the pieces didn't fall. One night she came home late, her hair pinned up with sewing clips, fingers smudged with ink and thread grease. Adrian was asleep on the couch, a half-read book on his chest, and the TV murmuring low. She didn't wake him. Instead, she sat beside him, tucked a blanket around his chest, and stared at the way his face looked when he wasn't carrying the world. There was a gentleness there, one that made her chest ache. The media tried again. When Richard saw her brand gaining traction, he resurfaced, this time through indirect channels. Whispers of her past appeared in forums. Paparazzi parked outside her boutique. A few blog posts questioned the credibility of a woman launching a brand out of nowhere. It should have shattered her. But it didn't. Because she had changed. And because Adrian had receipts. The moment the noise began, Adrian contacted a private legal firm he trusted more than anyone. They compiled a quiet but powerful cease and desist campaign. Documents were sent. Names were redacted from lawsuits. Dossiers with Richard's activities. Not just shady finances, but intimate testimonies from ex-employees and old business partners were quietly leaked to the right people. Richard disappeared from her radar after that. No formal statement. No apologies. Just silence. And for once she welcomed it. One afternoon, she returned to the boutique to find a stranger in the front room. An older woman with lines around her mouth and eyes that had seen too much. She was holding a navy dress in her hands, fingers trembling. I'm not sure it's my size," the woman whispered. Isabella stepped forward, her voice soft. "Do you like how it feels?" The woman nodded. "Then it's your size." The woman smiled, and for a moment, Isabella saw a flicker of herself in her. The version that had once needed someone to say you're allowed to choose joy. That night, Isabella cried in the storage room. Not from pain, but from the strange, overwhelming truth that healing didn't just restore, it created. Adrian didn't push when her emotions flooded. When she was too tired to talk, he simply sat beside her on the boutique's little sofa, sipping tea. When she broke down in the middle of folding fabric, he picked up the edges without question and helped her breathe through it. He never said you're strong like it was a compliment. He said it like it was a fact. One evening, she stood in the boutique alone after closing. The lights were dimmed, music low. The windows reflected her image back at her. Not as Richard's wife, not as someone broken, not as a survivor, but as a woman who had become. Adrian stepped inside, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "I figured you needed sugar," he said. She took one, their fingers brushing. "I needed you," she said before she could stop herself. He paused. "You have me," he said, and he didn't say it like a vow. He said it like something that had already been true for a long time. The morning of the boutique's grand opening arrived with the hush of coastal wind brushing against the windows of Isabella's new home. A quiet villa tucked beyond the bustle, perched on a low cliff where the sea whispered promises to the land. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, wrapped in a linen robe, her hair loosely tied back. A mug of chamomile tea sat in her hand, its steam curling upward into the golden shafts of morning light. Outside, the garden trembled softly in the breeze. A single gull passed overhead, casting a shadow over the patio. Behind her, Adrian emerged, still sleepy, shirtless, a scar visible beneath his collarbone. One of the only things about his past he never talked about. "You didn't sleep," he said, voice rough with sleep. "I didn't want to," she replied, turning to him. "I wanted to feel every hour of this morning." He walked to her slowly, wordlessly, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against his chest, letting his presence soak through her skin. Today wasn't just a boutique launch. Today was proof that she had rebuilt from the dust and the silence. That love could arrive softly, without applause or performance. That freedom didn't come in grand gestures. It came in choices made every day, quietly, courageously. The boutique shimmered in soft champagne light as the first guests stepped through the glass doors. The sign above the entrance now read, "Isabel." Not Isabella. Not Harrington. Just Isabel. The version of herself she chose, stripped of legacies, of expectation, of borrowed names. Friends. Clients. Local artists. Former strangers who had watched her journey from a distance and had now come to see what she'd created with her own hands. The first woman to walk in was the same older woman who had once held the navy dress with trembling fingers. She wore it now, and when Isabella saw her, her eyes filled, and for a moment the store went quiet in her ears. The woman smiled, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you for building something that knows who I am." Adrian didn't stand beside her during the opening. He stood behind her, letting her take the space, letting her shine in the fullness of her light. When reporters asked about the mysterious man seen with her during the early months, she simply smiled and said, "He's someone who reminded me that silence can be strength too." He watched her from across the room as she mingled with designers, signed orders, posed for photos, accepted compliments with gratitude and ease. He had always known she was powerful. Now the world knew too. That night, long after the boutique had closed, after the final guest had left, and the last bottle of champagne had been emptied, Isabella and Adrian sat on the boutique floor, cross-legged, surrounded by flowers, thank you cards, and fabric. No shoes. No noise. She looked at him in the soft overhead light. "I used to think love was supposed to be loud," she said. "Like movies. Like thunder." Adrian leaned back against the wall, watching her. "And now I think it's supposed to be quiet," she whispered. "Like breath. Like sunlight." He didn't say anything at first. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, something velvet. She inhaled sharply, but he didn't drop to one knee. Didn't make a speech. He simply opened the box and handed it to her. Inside was a ring, simple. A thin band of brushed gold, hand-forged. No diamond, just a single inscription inside. Unshackled. She looked up at him, heart in her throat. "No vows," he said. "No promises you don't choose every day. Just me. If you want me." She took the ring out, slipped it onto her finger, and said, "I already chose you." Years later, they would sit on that same boutique floor with their child between them, dark curls and wide eyes, and tell her the story of how strength found softness, and how softness didn't mean weakness. They would tell her that rain doesn't always bring storms, that sometimes it waters the roots. And in the quiet hum of a house filled with laughter, fabric, and slow mornings, they would go on choosing each other. Not because they had to, but because love, when unshackled, becomes the one thing worth choosing again and again.
Thank you so much for listening to this story at Folklore Chronicles-k stories. And please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, kindly click on the subscribe button, turn on the notification so when I post more stories like this, you'll be the first to get them. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your support and I do not take it for granted at all. Until I see you in my next video. Bye.